of the religion. And it all goes back to the Hebrew start of monotheism. So the Torah is the most sacred writings to the Hebrews. Most early history of the Israelites comes in the first 5 books of the Torah. It makes up part of the Old Testament for Christianity. So if you look at the first 5 books, so if you look at the Torah and you look at the Old Testament of Christianity, there's going to be some that are almost exactly the same and some that are very similar. Okay, so really the Old Testament of Christianity is very, very similar to the Torah. The Hebrews are monotheistic. God was called Yahweh. And Abraham made a covenant with God. And the covenant was the promise that he and his people would obey Yahweh in return for protection for Abraham and all his descendants. Obviously, this is very oversimplified, but we're okay. The Torah. Again, remember Abraham was from Ur. He was basically a nomadic herder. He's said to have a special relationship with God, and his descendants would inherit that relationship as long as they obeyed and believed in Yahweh. The God commands Abraham and his family to leave Ur somewhere between 2000 and 1800 BCE. We're probably looking, I always write down like 1900 BCE. The covenant with God was God said, I will make you a great nation if only you do these things. And so they left. And they went to the land of Canaan. So Canaan is part of Palestine. And Palestine was shared. So here's Canaan. Okay? Here's Palestine, this whole region. Okay, this is, and Canaan was shared with many other cultures. In particular, the Phoenicians. What else do I want to say? There was a couple others I want to put in there. Can't think of what I was going to say. Okay, but anyway, you can see its relationship. Here's the Dead Sea. Here's Jericho. So Mesopotamia is over here. They had to go through the desert to get there. You've got the Sea of Galilee. You've got the Dead Sea. You come down. This is the Sinai Peninsula, that little piece of land here. Notice this is the Red Sea that comes up here. In ancient time in Egypt, in parts of Egypt history, there was actually a canal that they built. We've got the Suez Canal now, but they actually built one back then. It was more, because the delta extends it sort of this way. Okay? And so here's the delta now. So you can see that, this connection between Africa and Asia with the Sinai Peninsula is pretty clear and not a great distance. This is all the Mediterranean. Okay? All right. This area, it's also called the Levant. It's another name for it, Levant, kind of coming up to the Syria area. So if you see it, if someone says Canaan, talking about ancient history, Canaan, Levant, or Palestine, this is the region they're all talking about. And different historians use it to different degrees of precision. Okay? All right, so they have crossroads there. It's a crossroads of the world, really, which was pretty fantastic. It linked Anatolia, Anatolia is modern-day Turkey area, okay? Egypt, Arabia, which is, Saudi Arabia is right over here, okay? Mesopotamia, here. And he had access to all the Mediterranean peoples. So we get up to the Greeks and the people that lived in northern Africa on the sea and the Mediterranean, and the people that lived all around Anatolia, and coming up on the entire area of the Mediterranean Sea on the east side. So it's really kind of this whole central thing. If you're from Egypt and you want to go to Anatolia, you're going to go through here. If you're from Mesopotamia and you want to get down to Egypt, you're probably going to come through here. So this is kind of a crossroads of everything. There's few natural resources in this region. First of all, there's rocky hills and deserts. You have the Negev and the Sinai deserts to the south. The coastal plains are fabulous. The coastal plains were great, but they were held by others, including the Philistines. Now, and again, this has particularly comes because we got a lot of our information from the Hebrew Bible and the Hebrew history. When you say someone now, you say someone's a Philistine. What are you saying about him?
Uncultured.
Bad. That's the first thing. What else?
Uncultured.
Uncultured. Barbaric. Primitive. Okay? That was the Hebrew view of the Philistines. They had many, many, many battles with the Philistines. The David and Goliath story is a Philistine versus Israelite story. Okay? And they look at them as, with all those, those negative terms, and that's why now, if you call someone a Philistine as an adjective, okay, or as a name-calling type thing, that is a very negative term. And that comes from this relationship back in this time period. Okay, but the coastal plains are great, but they have to share them. Limited resources, sharing, you know what happens. Okay, lots of battles. There's also a very fertile plain that with grassy slopes, and the best farming was in the valley of the Jordan River. So right in here, this Jordan River between the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea was where the best farming was. And that's actually where Abraham and his family settled. Okay, so they were mostly nomadic. They were kind of semi-nomadic. They had kind of semi-permanent dwellings that they could be in, but they'd pick them up and move. They were sheep herders. And Abraham finally buys some land at the end of his life, which was a long life, to bury his favorite wife, Sarah. And that was the first land ownership, really, that put a place and settled down where Abraham wanted to claim. Okay, so they lived in Canaan. Canaan is modern-day Syria, Jordan, Israel, okay? And that's all I want to say about that one. Is there anything else in your notes that I should have covered that I put down there?
Growth and move to Egypt.
Okay, that's where we're going now. Okay, next. So you go on for a couple hundred years, several generations, and some bad things happen. Let me see if I got. Okay. Okay. So around 1650 is their guesstimate. Around 1650 BCE, descendants of Abraham moved to Egypt. Why? Why did we put this move? There was a drought in the region that we were talking about, a long-standing drought. Went on for decades. Okay? Not just a year, not just 2 years. It was over 10 years. It was 20 years of poor farming, poor water, poor... so it went on and on. They kept thinking we can make it. Remember, they're nomadic herders. They don't need lots and lots of grass. They're not agriculturalists. But the region needs agriculture, and they needed enough for their sheep. Things are very bad. Okay? There's famine because of the drought and the poor crops for so long. They went down to cross the Sinai Peninsula, and this was with Abraham's grandson. So just a couple generations. So the time periods aren't exactly, they've changed depending on sources. Jacob, who's also known as Israel. Okay. So Jacob had 12 sons. Each ended up leading a separate family group or tribe eventually. And that's, you have the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay. So Israel was another name for him. His sons were the leaders of the 12 tribes. One son, Joseph, if you've seen Joseph in the
amazing Technicolor
Technicolor coat or whatever it's called, you get the gist of the story.
Broadway.
Joseph and the
Huh? It's a
Have
musical.
you, that's a
It's a musical.
Broadway play. It's played in the region several times. But anyway, quick story. Jacob is Joseph is the youngest son of Jacob. Finally, his old wife was able to have he had sons with other of his wives and other handmaidens of the wives, which was common at the time. And he finally was able to have a son with his favorite wife, young son, quite a bit younger than the brothers. And he was favored by Jacob, but his brothers were very jealous of him. And his father gave him this beautiful coat that they envied and all this. And they find, short story, they end up throwing him in a pit. They end up selling him into slavery to some people going by. They take Joseph to Egypt in slavery. They tell his father that Joseph was killed, and so now they're without Joseph. Joseph's down in Egypt creating his own success and all that. He becomes a great advisor to the Pharaoh. So Joseph gets great prominence eventually. But in the meantime, guys, please stop talking. In the meantime, that's what happened with that. So he sold it to a slave to traveling merchants by jealous brothers, and he ended up in Egypt, reaching a high position. After the drought, the Israelites, including Jacob and the rest of the brothers and their families, moved south to Egypt, particularly in the Nile River Delta area, where they were set up in outlying communities of remember, Egypt doesn't have huge numbers of cities, big cities, and it's mostly for the elite. So they're out in these villages setting some things up, probably during the time of the Hyksos. Okay, so probably during the time of the Hyksos in that area, in that region time. They lived there peacefully for a while, probably with permission from the rulers, for several generations. They even built some of their own towns and quote-unquote cities. We know when we talk about cities in Egypt, we're only talking about much smaller things. We're not talking about the grand cities of the pharaohs. Okay, so they lived there for a while, but then the Hyksos get kicked out, right? The power changes. The accessibility to these people who believe in something different changes. The economy changes. All sorts of different things happen. Pay attention to what happens to that time period after the Hyksos. And the tolerance for the people that have come in during the Hyksos is very minimal because the people are very angry at the loss of their unity and their culture at the time. They want to rebuild it up. The Israelites are not part of that rebuilding of that. Where some of them are okay and sort of still live on the outskirts and live in, and just live and work in their communities and villages. Others of them are put into slavery. Okay, so then Exodus. The big Exodus that you hear about, and Exodus in the Bible and all this, is actually at a time around 1200s, in the 1200s. Remember the time periods I told you to pay attention to. The 1200s, 1250-ish, and 1000. There's lots of things going on. So, why would the Egyptian pharaoh lose enough legitimacy at the time for the collapse, basically, of Egypt's society, for a group of people to be able to take over control and leave? There are other things that are happening. There's other people beating down the doors to come in, etc. So, in about 12,000 or 1200 BCE, Moses led the people out of Egypt. The dates are controversial. There's no record in the Egyptian official records. Why is that? Yeah, we're going to say, yeah, yo-ho! They came in, these poor people and the slaves, and they came in and they overtook us and they left and they took a bunch of our stuff with them and they left us here and they beat the Pharaoh at his own game. No, they didn't write any of that down. Okay? The victors write things down, right? The losers don't write things down. So they didn't write anything about it in their records. So again, we have the religious records. This is probably during the reign of Seti the First or Ramses the Second. Ramses the Great. Okay? All right. So, at sea. They were recorded to have escaped. What you see in the movies and visuals and all this. So first of all, Moses' birth, the Pharaoh is feeling threatened by the Hebrews, also by a prophecy that there was a son born that was going to take over and all that. And so he had all the male children killed. Okay? Moses' mother laid him in a basket in the reeds of the Nile, and he floated away, kind of leaving his survival up to the gods. And an Egyptian princess found him and raised him as her son in luxury. So again, here's some stylized pictures of it. Here's Moses being put in the basket by his mother in the reeds of the Nile. Okay? But when he found out about his Hebrew birth, again, he started acting on it, but he became, he was just an Egyptian. He was raised as an Egyptian prince, but pretty soon he found out about it, and his secret got out, and he was enslaved. By the command of God, he was told to leave the Hebrews out of Egypt. Okay? And this became known as the Exodus. We hear, "Let my people go," the famous words. That's coming from this story. And this has some of the things. There was all sorts of plagues and things that happened as God was saying, "Let them go." They didn't go. You'll get snakes. You'll get blood. You'll get your children will die. Finally, a disease came. A plague came that killed one of the Pharaoh's sons. And at that point, it was sort of what. The Pharaoh finally just said, "Just get out of here then, just go." And they started leaving. But then the Pharaoh got us, "What am I doing saying just go? What are you talking about? They brought us all these problems, they brought us these plagues, they haven't paid back." So he started chasing them out of the region. And this is where we get the story of the parting of the Red Sea. Okay? So again, Moses stands and the Red Sea parts. The story is the Red Sea parts. The Israelites are able to go through the area, and when they get to the other side, then he puts down his whatever you call this thing again, staff again, and God closes up the sea as the Egyptians are coming through. See, these are all people down here walking through. Okay, walking through the sea. And the river comes or the water rises up again and swallows up all the Egyptians in their chariots. They're chasing after the Israelites. The Israelites are safe on the other side of that part. Now, where they think they probably actually went through was close by the delta. Probably not this type of thing, but again, who knows, Historians would say it's probably in the Sea of Reeds, which is up in the delta region, which is sometimes interpreted as the Red Sea. Others say more shallow waters where it was high tide and low tide type thing more, possibly near the delta.